Before starting, I decided to go for a triangular hill, so I cut 2 different types of plywood and beveled them with a jigsaw. It looks like they were 5 and 15 mm thick, but it doesn't really matter. After gluing the pieces together with PVA glue, I cast some stones using cheap plaster and Woodland Scenics molds. To be honest, I didn't mix enough plaster, so you can see the back of my rocks is not perfect. Don't worry, it doesn't affect the final result. When positioning the rocks, you don't need to be super precise. Just play around with them and look for the best placement you can get. You're going to glue them down later on. Once you find the rock configuration you like the most, it's time to stick the rocks in place and get rid of the step between the wood layers. To do so, we'll mix some homemade sculpting plaster and spread it all over the base to look for a more organic result. For the next step, I took a water bottle, cut it open and used it to mix my sculpting plaster. I quickly started applying it around the base to simulate the soil. I started in those areas where I want the rocks to sit. Of course, I also tried to get rid of the step between the 2 levels. Try to be as organic as possible. If you manage to be good enough, you won't even need to go back and do touch-ups. By the way, sorry for my hand. I chose a terrible angle to do this. Lesson learned. I will make sure it won't happen again. Well, at least in the next videos. I will finish this step off cam, but if you want to see how to make the sculpting plaster, head for Luke's APS YouTube channel and check it out. I will put a link down in the description. This is how the hill looked after applying the sculpting plaster. The piece was not dried because I was trying to deal with Japan's famous high humidity, but I thought it would be nice to show you. I also applied some additional small rocks here and there to get a more realistic piece. When we'll be done with this piece, it will look like a bunch of rock outcroppings surrounded by green ground. I am planning to use this piece of terrain as a line of sight blocker for skirmish wargames. It is probably too small to be functional in a 40k game, but I like how it looks right now. In the next step, we'll start painting the rocks. We'll be painting the rocks with a progression of brown. We'll start with this Americana True Ochre, followed by burnt sienna, and finally burnt umber. The final step will be washing everything with charcoal grey, a really dark grey brown with the addition of some pure black. First of all, let me show how to prepare the washes by diluting the craft paints with water. Get a blob of paint in a plastic container and add the same volume of water. Again, sorry for my hands. They keep going in front of the camera all the time. You need to get close to a thick wash consistency. Feel free to add more water if you need. Once we're ready, we'll be painting the rocks in a random pattern. Leave some white spots here and there to give the rock a more realistic look. I will show you only the ochre and do the burnt sienna off cam, but the process is the same. I know, it looks like crap right now, but you have to be patient. You'll see the result coming together step by step. The darker brown tone, burnt umber, will be diluted even more and will be used to tie the colors together, almost as a wash or a glaze. So here we are with the rocks painted in 3 colors. The ochre, the sienna, and the burnt umber wash. Burnt umber was more diluted than the others, so you can see how it stains the rocks differently. The plaster was still wet, so this color did not stain too excessively. It just ties everything together. The rocks are now brown, and we need to change this. So we now move to a diluted wash made of charcoal gray. Mix it well and slab it on. Let me speed up this part. Your paint now is a wash, and you want it to go everywhere. My wash was actually too diluted, so I gave it another coat after the first one. And then, off cam, I'll also do a light dry brush with some yellowish off-white paint. This is how the finished rocks look like after 2 washes. I went a little bit too far with the second wash, but I think the result is pretty good. The piece is still wet, so I have to wait for it to dry before moving to the dry brush step. I'm not going to show it, it's just a normal dry brush with an off-white paint. Look how lovely the details on the rocks are. Beautiful. Amazingly enough, I managed to change the white balance on my phone. Now the rocks look more natural and closer to their real life color. You can also see how the dry brushing added a lot to the three-dimensional look of the piece. I'm pretty satisfied with the result, so let's call the part 1 of this tutorial done. In the next part, I will move on to the ground cover and flocking stages. Thank you so much for watching my very first video. If you like this tutorial, please like and subscribe so I can keep making more. Be sure to leave your critiques in the comment below so I can keep improving.